Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Inside Marketing. I'm really excited today to be joined by Richard Goodhead, who is the Chief Marketing Officer at Lucideon. So, thank you so much, Richard, for joining us on a very
You're
warm
welcome.
day.
You're
It's
welcome. Yeah,
lovely to
no
have you
problem.
with us. No, great to have you with us. And I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion today. And with all of your experience in the field of marketing, it's a real privilege to be kind of taken through that and to kind of hear what your insight is on the world of marketing as it stands in 2024. So, yeah, really excited to get into that today. Be great, Richard, if you could perhaps take us through you and marketing and kind of your maybe your role right now and what you're currently doing, but also kind of all the way back to the beginning and where did it start? How did you get into marketing? Was that always what you were going to do? And then what have you done kind of throughout your career so far? That'd be really, really interesting if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure, no problem. But firstly, thanks for the opportunity. It's nice to have an opportunity to discuss this. I think to answer your question, I'll actually do it completely chronologically because
Yeah, no problems.
what I've what I'm doing now is fundamentally a function of some of the experience I've had up to this point. So it kind of
Mm,
works in that sense. So if you go back far enough, then I never had any intentions of being a marketer whatsoever. I was originally very much your maths, physics, chemistry, A-level kind of guy, and I was definitely
yeah.
destined to do engineering. And when I was a young man, I very much wanted to work in Formula One.
Okay.
And that was what I wanted to try and do, to the point when I was about 16, I wrote to all of the teams asking for sponsorship for
Oh,
university. None of them gave that to me, but so I went to aerospace companies, and to cut a long story short, Rolls-Royce did sponsor me through university. So they
nice.
sponsored me as one of the last cohorts of sponsored undergraduates. They now just take on people from graduates onwards, whereas, as I say, mine was the last cohort where they took us straight from A-levels. We did a year out.
Great.
They sponsored us through uni, and then the kind of quid pro quo was you were supposed to spend the rest of your career then with Rolls-Royce, which I did for a bit, but then I actually
Yeah.
achieved my dream and got a job with the Formula One team at Tyrrell, so I was the team's aerodynamicist. Anyone who follows Formula One at all will know that Tyrrell no longer exists, so that job
Hmm.
didn't stay around forever, and I ended up going up back to Rolls-Royce. And how I got into marketing was an interesting one of those, I guess, quirks of life. Um, when I went back to Rolls-Royce, I started to work in a group of aircraft performance engineers, which was very much my degree. But that was
Okay.
unusual within Rolls-Royce because Rolls-Royce, not the motor cars, Rolls-Royce aero engines, they have a lot of engine-related engineers, and I was in a small
Mm,
group of aircraft-related engineers because what Rolls-Royce needed is someone who understands how the aeroplanes work that their engines power. And that
mm,
team of aircraft performance engineers provided a service both to the technical community in terms of what are the requirements from the customers. You start to see some marketing coming in already. What are the
yeah, yeah.
requirements from the customer? What are those unmet needs that you, as an engine manufacturer, Rolls-Royce had to supply? But the other audience internally was the sales and marketing teams who needed um, help to sell the product to the customer,
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly in a world which was moving from, if you go back far enough, it was engineers selling to engineers, then it became
Yeah.
engineers selling to pilots. Increasingly, it became the decision makers were accountants and
Yeah.
financial people who wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily know what the relative benefits are. Another marketing word leaping in
Yeah.
of one engine versus another. So they needed a team that would translate that feature from a benefit, into a
How
benefit.
interesting.
And as a result of that, not only was that kind of my first dabble, if you like, into taking what was a very technical background into a more commercial one, but
Mm,
perhaps more importantly, because that team of engineers was fought over between the marketing function and the engineering function, every so often one wins and it moves. And I happen to
yeah.
be in one of the times it moved from being engineering into marketing. So that's technically
Mm,
how I got into marketing. Once I
interesting.
made that move and I saw what was happening within Rolls-Royce's marketing department, there was no way I was ever going back. Uh, and so I really very quickly found I much more enjoyed talking about the product and selling its values and benefits and virtues than I did
Mm,
designing the products.
yeah.
And so I started as I moved. The team I was in moved. I then moved into product marketing,
Mm.
which when you're talking about an aero engine is very much a technical sale. If you don't
Yeah.
have the technical background to understand how to translate that into something more simple, you know, you're going nowhere.
Mm.
So that was what I did there, and from then on, I progressively went into or progressively ran all of the subgroups within what Rolls-Royce's marketing team for civil aerospace entailed.
Right.
Ultimately, ended up running all of the marketing activities for Rolls-Royce Civil Aerospace, whether it's product, services, or technologies, in the two main markets they serve, which are that of airlines and business
Mm.
aviation.
Wow.
And what that taught me along the way, and what is applicable in my current role, is that there's very much, depending on what the product or service that the company you're involved in is, then if it's B2B and it's technical, it's very, very useful to have a technical background.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I honed that transition from being a qualified engineer to a marketer over those years through
Yeah.
experience in the job. But it honed what my understanding of what marketing actually is in that environment as well, because it means different things to different people.
Yeah.
And it also means different things in different contexts. And
Yeah.
working for an FMCG or a B2C company is very different from working for a B2B company. So I always define marketing as what it means to me, and therefore what I run my teams to do. It's three things.
Mm.
It's understanding the market, or when
Mm.
you're a cross-sector business like Lucideon, markets.
Yeah.
It's provision of strategic guidance to the business as a result of that understanding.
Hmm.
And then the last, which is probably the most fun but also the most nebulous of the three elements, is what I describe as creating the climate for the customer to say yes. And that's
Okay.
anything, in my definition, that's anything back in time from the point at which the sales team is negotiating on price. So it can
Mm.
include the product marketing I've referred to earlier, right close to the sale, or way back in the sales pipeline. It can be trying to achieve that kind of psychological heart space of the prospective client when they
Yeah.
might even not know they've got a need, but they need to, you know, reference you when you do appear as being able to provide their need. And so that can be any kind of marketing communications collateral, from websites to apps to, you know, occasionally still the old traditional brochure, whatever it is. And they're
Yeah.
the three things. And so now that's what I do at Lucidian. So the
Fascinating.
translation, if you like, from what I was doing at Rolls-Royce to Lucidian, there are some key similarities, because at the heart of what Lucidian does is a highly complex technical offering,
Yes,
which
of
you need
course.
to be
Yeah.
able to translate to a compelling value proposition for someone who's not
Hmm.
necessarily that technical. And so in
Mm.
Rolls-Royce it was aero engines, here it's provision of material science, that understanding, but they're the similarities. The
Yeah.
differences, Rolls-Royce was making aero engines for aeroplanes in, okay, two markets, but it's still very much aerospace, whereas now I'm very much cross-sector. Lucidian offers services to aerospace, yes, but also nuclear, energy, healthcare, construction,
Yeah.
anywhere where there's a material, we can probably help. So that's a big difference, and it also makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. How interesting. And, a lot of people who come on the podcast, I feel like there's two pathways really. You kind of came through the technical side and learned the skill of marketing. And I really agree with you on that point there, that marketing cannot really be used as an umbrella term, because in all the different industries and for all the different offerings, it is actually a very different role and a very different function. But that's really interesting that you came from the technical side. I wonder then, when you moved to Lucidian, if you, knowing how much benefit that gave you in Rolls-Royce to have that technical background, there must have been quite an in-depth kind of learning phase of delving into material science and doing
Yeah.
that as a precursor to building the strategy. I guess that was probably quite an intense period for you at the beginning.
It was exactly, because you've got to get to a certain level of understanding to be able to talk articulately
Mm.
onward, if you like.
Mm.
That said, although it's a different discipline in terms of material science versus engineering, at the core of it, really, it's still a technical understanding. And, you know, my A-level chemistry still actually comes into
Yeah,
play
there
every
you
now and
go.
then.
It was
And
a good choice all along.
yeah, and the other thing I think that you learn with experience is how the depth of the level of understanding you need to go to before you call in
Yes.
the expert. And I think that's something that you definitely refine over time.
Mm,
I don't need to be the world's expert on XYZ when he or she is sitting over there. I
yes.
just know at what point it's appropriate to ask them to join the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think that period of learning is something that all senior marketers will kind of understand. We've got to almost wipe out any previous bias or just really put ourselves in the shoes of the customers, the people that we're selling to. And I love what you said that about creating the climate in which our customers are going to say yes. So I wonder how you tackle that. And you mentioned how, there's different people that you're selling to, but also people that have varying levels of understanding of the technical aspects of what it is that you do. So
hmm
how do you get yourselves in that mindset of what climate is going to make people say yes? What tactics do you use with your team to be able to get there, if you wouldn't mind sharing?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned it. It's getting into the shoes of the customer and considering the world from their perspective.
Yeah.
And the challenge, but also what makes it fun, is the different types of customer that will be within that kind of world. I mean, there is, as I'm sure many listeners and yourself will be aware of, often people use personas in this regard.
Yeah.
That for me depends on the level of granularity you go down to. It's fundamentally a fancy way of segmentation
Yeah.
when you get down to it. And
Mm,
it depends, just like segmentation, it depends on at what level, how far down you go in breaking it down and ultimately segmenting as to how
mm,
useful it can be. Ultimately, even customers who on paper look like they're in the same category will be different individuals and therefore respond
yeah.
differently. But you can make some headway by grouping in certain categories, and we do
Mm,
that. And we also try to consider not just what the espoused needs are from
mm,
our customers, but particularly in the line of work that Lucidion's in, we also try and dig a bit deeper and really understand when the customer says they need X, what's driven them to conclude they need X and actually
yeah.
don't really need Y. We don't try and be
Mm,
as leading the witness as much of that, but we often try and scratch away, and it's almost like asking the five whys. You keep drilling a level
yes.
down and down and down to get to
Yeah.
really what is the fundamental driver, because oftentimes we will find that what need or requirement the customer brought to us, which we could fulfill, they
Yeah.
actually wanted something different or in
Mm,
addition. And so a
mm,
great example recently is a very large company who I can't name for confidentiality reasons, but they came to us that they're trying to make nuclear fusion commercially viable. And they came
yeah.
to us with what was actually quite a very simple transactional piece of testing business. But we
Mm,
just kept on, why do you want to do that? And what's actually turned out is
mm,
we've been able to help on a more consultancy-based business and really help them achieve their goals just through asking more questions. So we
yeah.
try and do that as well, because a lot of the time, and that's one of the things I guess that is a weakness of the segmentation or persona type approach. If you take at face value what the customer says they think their need are, or is
Yeah.
or are, you might miss something, because sometimes they need
Yeah.
help even to get to that point, and that's not being pejorative. It's just a fact.
Yeah.
And being a material science based consultancy that works like that with our customers, offering a service rather than a transaction, that's been a very useful technique for us.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I think you're really it's really interesting to think about that process of digging and scratching beneath the surface, because I think often our customers are potentially slightly confused, or they don't necessarily sit and think about the real reason why they're having this issue or what the root cause of that
Yeah,
is. And for so long they've said, oh, it's because of this, it's because of this, it's because of this, and actually when we delve deeper it might be something different. And
yeah,
I think that idea of really truly understanding what it is that we solve rather than what it is that we sell,
yes,
it's important to know the technical expertise, but it's also mostly just important to know how do we like give people not sleepless nights? How do we solve some fear or some anxiety or some worry in someone's brain, because
Yeah,
it's someone's responsibility and we're solving that for somebody, and so it's that we've got to find, isn't it?
it is. And we often, to pick up on some of the language you use there, we often actually start conversations with some of our prospective clients. What's keeping you up at night?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good one, isn't it? Yeah. Because it really strips it back, doesn't it? It kind of
Hmm.
it's almost a bit of a pattern interrupt where they're not expecting us to speak like that. But that gets to the core, that cuts through the noise. And then I think sometimes that makes them sit back and think, well, actually, good question. Well, this really stressed me out, but it's probably not related. Oh, hang on, it is.
Yes.
And that's what we need to be talking about. So that's yeah, really interesting. And I think that the personas thing is yeah, people bring that up a lot, and that's definitely something that I've used myself. Sometimes feels a bit limiting, doesn't it? And
Mm.
also sometimes feels like it could go on forever. Well, hypothetically, this could be a persona that could buy from us, and
Yeah.
it also, and it also sometimes feels like as soon as you've made personas, they're out of date, because
Yeah.
personas are based on previous data that we have or last quarter's sales or whatever, and the markets are forever changing and the demands are forever changing. So you make personas, but then you sort of have that feeling of, well, might not be the case now. Different
Yeah.
people might now wanting to be buying from us, and so it's always a bit of a difficult one.
It is. I
Yeah.
mean, but without sounding like I want to completely diss personas, the way I like to think about these things, it's similar to when I was studying for my MBA, and you get model after model after model. No
Mm,
single model is a panacea and going to solve all of the world's problems.
yeah.
And it's about understanding that what you've got actually is another tool or a technique to deploy, which will provide some insight. It's just another lens through which to
Yes.
view the problem, and it will give
Yes.
you a different view. It won't give you the right one or the wrong one or the one,
Mm.
but the more tools you use, the more insight you're likely to get.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the more angles you can look at a problem from, like the better solution you're probably going to come up
Yeah.
with. So yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I guess in Lucidian at the moment, then, or perhaps drawing on kind of previous experience or things that you've done, what's been something that really changed the game or is changing the game for you? So I'm thinking, over the last 12 months or in a previous time, can you talk to us about a time when maybe you implemented something that was a little bit novel that not many people in the industry that were doing, whether that's like a channel or some tech or just something a bit different, and how that kind of changed things up for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll definitely have a crack at answering that. I guess the bit I'd probably struggle with is to try and claim any novelty and that no one else has got it done in the industry, because I genuinely I don't think there's something that I've done that I could put into that category. But what I have found successful over the years is sticking to a handful of tried and trusted techniques and doing
Hmm.
them well and consistently. And one of the things that I introduced both back when I was at Rolls-Royce and more recently in Lucideon, and it won't be rocket science to many of the listeners because they'll all have done it, but for me, I think being consistent with it works. That's the concept of integrated marketing communications, and having consistency through
Yeah.
all of your channels and speaking the one truth with many voices.
Mm.
Um, just by putting a little bit of rigor and discipline around that, and using the rest of the organization's employees as a force multiplier, and showing them and explaining to them what the advantage is of doing it in a consistent and
Mm.
freedom with a framework, I'll say, because I don't want it to come across as overly structured,
Yeah.
you get better results. And
Yeah.
so, and one of the things that I've come across several times in my professional career from bosses who weren't marketers is what I'll kind of refer to as the magpie syndrome. They're always wanting something new and shiny and different.
Yes. Yeah.
And what they're actually doing is undermining consistency. I'm
Yes.
not against the concept of having something that stands out, but to completely, a complete rebrand every 2 years, for example, or a new website
Yeah.
every 2 years isn't the right approach, because
Yeah.
you're not allowing enough time to embed and be consistent. And what I often found, there was a tension between how long I thought, for example, a ad campaign might have in terms of its longevity versus other stakeholders in the business. And that's the point I'll make. It's always people in the business who have this contempt that's bred from familiarity rather than your target audience, which
Yeah.
is external. And so just having that discipline, rigor, and ability to then, because you've applied that rigor and discipline, point out the results of that approach allows you to, success begets success. Then you can actually, you're given the kind of hunting license to go and deploy the techniques as
Yes.
you see fit. So that's what I did when as I say, when I was back at Rolls-Royce, and I've done it more recently because I've not been with Lucideon that long, and just making sure there's a consistent, and I always hesitate with certain buzzwords, but consistent narrative in terms of what you're saying and how it reflects versus what you've said your purpose, vision, mission are.
Yes.
Making sure it's resonant with the brand, making sure that your tone of voice in all of your forms of communication doesn't have to be the same, but it has to be consistent. And it can be
Yes.
different for different channels, but it still needs to have a core consistency within it.
Of
And
course.
that I've just found that single application, and I guess it comes back from my background as being an engineer and a scientist. Really, it's applying whatever science is possible within what is oftentimes the art of marketing.
Yeah. No, that, yeah, really interesting. And I think that, just as you were talking there, I definitely can think of so many times where that simple fundamental is just so often ignored, and it is that syndrome that you're talking about there. People are chasing, or maybe feeling that kind of fear of missing out, or that fear that they're falling behind by not hopping on the latest channel, so that
Yeah,
becomes top of the priority list. And the things that actually really pay off, consistency, the long-term focus, getting the basics right, are kind of ignored, and so things become a little bit scruffy, and that's really what matters.
yeah,
And I think that's difficult, and it's interesting there as well what you mentioned about the internal pressure for a senior marketing professional for this short-term return, and these things that we know take a long time to pay off. And you're right, once we've got one, that's a win, and then we're kind of it's off our back a little bit because we've proved our point. But so many things are long-term activities, and we're not going to see a tangible return immediately. They're things that over time build this halo effect, or build this brand credibility. So
yeah.
yeah, do you think that's quite a common tension internally as the top marketer in a business, to kind of have
I
that
do.
tussle between short-term pressure and long-term focus?
Very definitely, and it's also a tension. There's the almost it's almost mythical now, the tension between finance and marketing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Fortunately, I hasten to add, in my current role, I'm very lucky in that
Mm.
my current boss is very definitely from the marketing. He's cut from the
Yeah.
marketing cloth. He's very sympathetic to it, and very keen, and definitely an advocate of marketing. And my CFO
Mm.
at the moment is also. Um, I've had far more challenging conversations with CFOs that don't get it, and this one does, so
Yes.
that's good. But yeah, it's true. You get that tension, and when the inevitability of what context marketeers work in that it's a complex situation. It's not the difference that was taught to me. The difference between complicated and complex. Complicated, that's something that, yes, it's very involved, but you get the same input and output every time. So a jet engine is a great example of something that's complicated, but you
Mm.
put a certain amount of fuel in and you ignite it, you'll get a certain effect. You can control that. Complex, the link between cause and effect is very much less obvious
Yes.
to the extent it might barely be there. And so knowing what you can do now to pull this lever to get the result over there, it's far less mechanical and obvious, and the laws of causality don't tend to apply, and you're working in a completely different context as a result of that. And I think that's something that once you've got it, it's great, but for those stakeholders that haven't got that, they can be challenging to
Mm.
work with, and not challenging necessarily in a bad way, because it is good. We as marketers are challenged to improve that cause and effect linkage, but there are times when you're never going to be able to do it in as direct way as a jet engine's component, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine your scientific background definitely aids that process because, in science, there is, like you talked about the jet engine, there is a process from A to B, even if there's 500,000 mini steps within that
Yeah.
engine. I could, if you wanted to, go and walk you around each of those steps and you'd see the logic. So I guess you probably apply a similar kind of amount of detail and kind of I guess insight into the process, even if it's complex, not complicated, and even if it's not something I could draw out for you, but let me show you kind of the closest thing to that and all the different steps within the engine. So
Yes.
I guess that's where the engineering background comes in, working with the people in your team.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
probably true. But I
yeah.
think that was probably the single biggest um, challenge in terms of my transition from science/stroke engineering background to becoming a marketer. It was becoming comfortable with that degree of ambiguity and the nebulousness of
Mm,
certain elements of the world I'm in now, because up to that point, in all of the exams I'd sat, whether it's A levels or degree or whatever, there was a right answer, and you could
yes.
get to the right answer. There's no such thing as the right answer in the world
Yeah,
I'm in now. There are many right answers.
yeah,
There are many wrong
yeah,
answers.
yeah.
You're trying to find, under the circumstances you're in at that moment, the optimum.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes in a strange way, in marketing, the wrong answer is the right answer because the wrong answer gives us further down takes us further down the path towards the right answer. Whereas, yeah, in science, it's just wrong or it's wrong. The experiment works or it doesn't work. So it's
Yeah, I think in both,
yeah,
when you get a wrong answer, you can rule that out as a route to take. So it does have
yeah.
a certain value. But yeah, I think you're right.
True. Yeah. How interesting. I mean, I think often kind of generalizations of marketers are these we like experimenting, we're super creative, therefore with science brains or with engineering brains who like analysis and detail and process, that's not really a match. So it's really interesting to like hear how you have joined both together and how you have bridged that gap. And I think your challenge there that you spoke about must have been quite difficult, really,
Yeah,
the
and
nebulousness of everything, as you mentioned.
it's why I describe marketing using those three elements I did earlier as well, because
Mm,
obviously, I think when I was at Rolls-Royce and people were asking me what does Rolls-Royce marketing do, a lot of the
mm,
time the answer is different from what they'd expect, because they'd
yeah,
have this vision in their mind as to what marketing is, which in certain contexts was probably accurate, but they tend to think more of the marketing that they as consumers are experiencing.
yeah,
So TV advertising, FMCG, B2C, all that kind of thing. And they overlook some of the elements that they don't see, which is
yeah,
probably fair enough, but actually are applicable to both. So some of the market analysis techniques that are, whether you're researching a B2C market or a B2B market, they're still actually quite scientific.
mm,
And when it really came to me once when I hadn't been long in role as the SVP for all of the marketing activities within roles, but what occurred to me at the time when we were trying to describe what marketing actually meant, so we were trying to educate both internal stakeholders and to some extent some of our customers as well, trying to come up with a definition that covered actually all of the various disciplines and functions we had within the marketing team.
yeah,
Because although I was SVP marketing, my team of 50 or so people was not a homogenous group of marketers. It was
mm,
actually a grouping of sub-disciplines,
yeah,
each with a very big contribution to make to the overall goal, but often the skill sets weren't fungible. So at one end of my team, there'd be graphic designers. At the other end of the team, there'd be real market analysis geeks who understood the
yes,
market. And not only was it often their personalities that were very different, but also their skill sets, and they weren't
yeah,
fungible. So it's very rare for one of these two examples I've given to become the other.
yeah,
Not unheard of, but it's quite rare. because the
Yeah.
skill sets are so different. And so that was both a kind of revelation to me in terms of what marketing could actually mean, but
Mm.
also it's fantastic fun because even within that one team, you've got such different types of conversations and intellectual challenges. It's just great.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I wonder what you came up with. Can you remember what you kind of came as a
Well, that's when
definition,
we
or did you?
arrived at this marketing is those three things, because it then
Yeah. Ah,
provided
sorry, I see. Yeah.
what we were looking for was a way of describing to everyone in the team something that resonated, so that everyone had a
Yes, of
line of sight
course.
to what we delivered.
Yeah.
And that short definition of those three things fitted everything that we
Yeah.
did, and it meant the graphic designers could say, "Yep, that's me." It meant the market analysts could say, "Yep,
Mm.
that's me." So could the product marketers, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like that that included as well the provision of data and insight to your internal team, because I think that's a part of marketing that either kind of slips under the radar, that people are fulfilling that purpose within the organization, or that just is neglected, and that's a real shame and a real missed
Yeah,
opportunity. Because we see the front line, we see what's happening, what's resonating, and if there's not that kind of sales marketing alignment where that information is being pushed back, wow, are we missing out? So yeah, I think that's where kind of senior marketers obviously have so many plates to spin, but that's one not to forget about, because you're making your job easier, seeing what's working, feed that back to the sales team, feed that back internally, and then the whole engine works a lot better. Otherwise, your engine's having to work a lot harder because we're not developing products that resonate with the data we're seeing. So
exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
difficult. There's a lot to do as a senior marketing leader. It is
There is.
overwhelming. And you mentioned they're a team of 50. We can imagine them all there, and keeping everybody in line, and kind of going back to your point about keeping a unified brand voice and keeping everything consistent. That's everything consistent across the channels, but also everything consistent in each of those 50 minds, each of those 50 day-to-day workloads, and keep making sure everybody's on the same page. So yeah, it's a feat, and it's very interesting to hear how different people tackle it. I wonder, just kind of moving away from that topic, as it if we could move on maybe to kind of marketing as it stands right now, and perhaps
Hmm.
what you're looking at over the next 12 months, or
Yeah.
continuing in your role at Lucideon. What Not what keeps you up at night, we won't use that line, but what what do you think is some of the biggest challenges that we face? What are things that you're thinking, gonna have to really think about how we're going to tackle that?
For me, because obviously I saw the question before and I was thinking about it too. The single biggest challenge I've consistently struggled with and continue to is still the application of meaningful metrics to
Yeah.
what we do. And it goes back to that conversation we were having earlier about the lack of a straight, 100% correlation between cause and effect.
Yeah.
What I would like to do, what certainly my boss would like to do, what finance would always like to do, is understand the return on the investment. How well are we doing what we're doing?
Yeah.
Everyone wants to know the answer to that question.
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
challenge is it's really hard to answer. And it
Mm.
remains hard to answer despite the application of technology and despite the ability with some of the digital channels we use to track whether it's impressions or engagement or click-through rates. None of them is perfect, because at the end of
Yes.
the day, what you still don't know is what's going on inside someone's head. And the only
Yeah.
way you're going to know that is to ask them and have a conversation with them. And
Yeah.
while that is a technique you can do through things like focus groups to an extent, you can't have as many conversations as you would like, because
Mm.
there's too many individuals out there. So that remains the single biggest challenge for me. I still have a bit of a bugbear that it's even more difficult in a B2B environment than a B2C for various
Yes.
reasons.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons, is that in the B2B environment, there's this pseudo layer of rationality involved. At
Yeah.
the end of
Okay.
the
Yeah.
day, yeah, and I'll take a Rolls-Royce example. If someone in the airline evaluation team is filling out a spreadsheet comparing two highly expensive aero engines to work out which is the best answer, oftentimes they'll try and boil that down into a quantitative analysis by assigning numbers to various features of the engine.
Hmm.
And oftentimes they'll try and boil it all right down so they see which number is bigger or smaller, depending on
Yeah.
which is better in that. But even when they're entering a number in a cell, it's an individual doing that with a bias. So there's a pseudo level of rationality, but even that is impaired, if you like, or
Yeah.
there's a phenomenon occurring. And so that not only keeps it interesting, but it makes it really hard. And another example I often used in terms of metrics and how challenging they were, again, it's a Rolls-Royce example, but if my team had done a brilliant job in convincing an airline to choose a Rolls-Royce engine over a General Electric engine, and we were confident right down to the wire that the competition was going to be won by Rolls-Royce, if then the President of the United States visited the President of Vietnam, in this case it was a Vietnamese airline, and said, hey, do you want a huge infrastructure deal, but you've
Yeah.
got to choose GE? Has my team
Yeah.
done a bad job? No.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
even measure it on the success of the outcome sometimes.
Mm.
So that's what remains for me the big challenge, metrics.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. And it's a challenge that we all share, no matter what industry we work in, B2C, B2B, it is difficult, and proving that value. And it often feels really, I think for senior marketing professionals, it can feel like you're almost a little bit backed into the corner with things like that, because if things haven't performed maybe as people have anticipated, you find yourself almost defending and justifying and trying to find excuses, or well, it's summer holidays, or well, it's this, whatever else, when actually it's just it's a wider problem that we can't really explain away. It's just something
Yeah.
that everybody is encountering. Do you think that if you had a magic wand, what do you think would get us a better solution for that? What is it? Just is the tech just not there yet, or what do you think is the core problem? Or just we'll never know because it all happens inside people's heads.
In my darker moments, I go to that, I think we'll never know, but there's still something, I've still got hope, and I don't know
Yeah,
what the
yeah, yeah.
answer is, but I do think there's something else that can help. I suspect it will be, going back to a previous part of the conversation, it won't be a panacea. It'll be something that helps shine a light. It'll be a
Yes.
torch in the dark as opposed to a full lit room. But the
Yeah.
more torches we can get, we might get, the room fully illuminated. So I remain optimistic, but I don't know what the answer is at the moment.
Yeah, yeah. But I think like you referenced there in your current team, having a team that are sympathetic to that being an issue is the first step really, because it's kind of acknowledging that this is something that we can't overcome right now. So how are we going to work around that? Like how are we going to identify some
Yeah.
metrics that show us indications of what we want to see without just sitting down and being frustrated every time that we can't show an attribution?
And I think it's about how precise you want to be as well. I think
Mm,
seeking precision is probably a fool's errand, whereas you can oftentimes get a clear sense of whether something's moving in the right direction. Your challenge
yeah,
is how far in the right
yeah,
direction, and is it far
yeah,
enough in the right direction?
yeah.
But nevertheless, you still get a feel for whether it's a good or a bad thing to varying degrees.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, sometimes something that we talk about on here is looking at things in different time frames. And I think if you're always taking a month view or a quarter
Hmm.
view, that's limiting in itself. So actually, taking a wider lens view, or looking at kind of year to date or 5 year to date, and then trying to see patterns there. I think often we can be really caught up in that pressure, if you like, to prove a return, that we're looking
Yes,
at too
yeah,
smaller segment of data.
I agree.
Um, and the story isn't there. The story is in the last 5 years or the last 12 months. So yeah, I think there's that. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge, and
And
hopefully
of
there'll
course,
be
you can use
something.
those techniques to your advantage when you're trying to portray data. You can choose your time window to
Of
back up the
course.
story. So we know we use those techniques kind of retrospectively. It's just about remembering they're there all the time.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. No, it's definitely a challenge. Hopefully there'll be something for us, but I think kind of acknowledging it as a challenge, a widespread challenge for everybody, and hopefully, listeners who are tuning in at the moment might be listening and thinking, "Oh, phew, I have that challenge as well," and it's nice to hear someone else say that
Or
they
if
do. So
someone's
it's
got the
almost
answer, please
yeah,
let me know.
or yeah, pop it in the comments. We'll be
Yeah,
very grateful.
yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we're kind of coming to the end of the time, Richard. I mean, just to end off our conversation, I quite like to just ask the guests about marketing, and if it hadn't been marketing, what you feel like you may have gone into in your life. Now, obviously, for you, there was a very clear kind of starting point with engineering, etc. So I imagine you would have carried on in that direction, or do
Yeah,
you see
I think
yourself
so.
doing something completely different?
Um, no, I think I probably it would have been that, with probably a dream of doing something where I could have been outside a lot more often than either
Yeah.
engineering or marketing lets me be. But I think what both, working in that kind of combined discipline of engineering and morphing into marketing has allowed me to do, which I'm very grateful
Mm,
for, is travel a lot and experience a lot of other cultures and countries, and realize that, this is it's a globe that we live on, and it's
yeah.
fascinating, and yeah, I'm grateful for that, and I think whatever I'd have ended up doing, it probably would have been sympathetic to that.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, and that perspective I think can only help you in your role, and ultimately marketing, and there's so many definitions, and we've discussed definitions in this conversation, but marketing, we're just working out how to connect with people, and the more
Yes,
people and cultures you go and absorb and see and understand, surely the better you're able to do that job.
that's
So
true
no,
diversity.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, very interesting to think about that. I always think sometimes people tell me they might have been a musician or a novelist or
Definitely not.
not those, no. Well, happy where you are then. That's great. No, thank you so much, Richard, for the conversation. We've kind of come to the end now, but it's been really, really interesting to
You're
talk to you, and
welcome.
I think there's been some great things there to take away. And fantastic journey you've been on, and really wish you all the best in Lucideon as you continue there.
Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you. Bye.